We as a population are really a coastal species. We've been living on coastlines since the start of civilization in Mesopotamia 10,000 years ago, and we continue to build and construct on coastlines. We have, for example, 40% of the Arabian Gulf coastline is made up of artificial infrastructure, like breakwaters, seawalls, jetties, and so on. The human population continues growing, and we're going to hit around 11 billion people by the end of the century. And with that, we are increasingly becoming urban, and we're increasingly building these urban spaces along coastlines. And so this infrastructure is going to continue to grow. We have concerns about this. The coastlines of our cities are often made up of things like seawalls, and these seawalls are just flat vertical substrates, usually made of cement or concrete, and they have very little texture to them. And what we've done in those cases is we've removed the natural heterogeneity and complexity of our coastlines. And in doing so, we therefore have removed habitat for different species. So one of the looming threats to coastal cities and their environments is climate change. Climate change obviously is something that's happening at global scales, but is affecting everyone on local scales. Here in the Gulf, we're very worried about sea level rise, in particular for coastal cities like Abu Dhabi and Dubai. We have an extremely low-lying coastline with a very low slope, and so even modest changes of, say, 50 centimeters of sea level rise will have significant impacts on the assets that we have along our coastlines. And as a result of this, we're going to be doing further development and what we call defense of our coastlines by adding further things like seawalls and other revetment sort of structures to protect these coastlines. And so by looking at how we can enhance the sustainability of these projects that have to happen over the next couple of decades, we hope to be able to augment and enhance the types and availability of ecosystems that we have along our coastlines. One of the techniques that we're exploring is to use very simple changes in the surface texture of these materials. So if you're putting in a seawall, typically you're going to pour a concrete form that is flat and featureless. If you can put in crevices, cracks, and other features like this, you can actually enhance the amount of organisms that will colonize that structure. And so we have a good team of scientists here at NYU Abu Dhabi who are exploring this. So for example, by putting in textures where you have various crevices and nooks and crannies, like we have in this experimental tile here, we're going to try and understand how this influences the type of organisms that colonize these structures, as well as the abundance of these various different organisms. And this is in pilot stages at this point. We're putting out something like 150 different tiles of various different textures, but over time we plan to scale this up to industrial sort of levels. My previous research on infrastructure in the Arabian Gulf has shown that we have incredibly diverse and quite abundant communities of organisms that colonize structures like seawalls and breakwaters. We have, for example, extensive corals that grow on these structures. We actually have, in many cases, more corals growing on these structures than we get on the natural coral reefs around here, simply because they're up and elevated above the sandy bottom that we have here, which gets stirred up every time we have a storm. We also have extremely high densities of fishes because they like the three-dimensional structure that's provided by these rocky substrates. And many of these are commercially important species. And obviously, many of these areas are off limits for fishing, so they sort of act as de facto marine protected areas. So there's an amazing variety of organisms that inhabit our marine coastlines along coastal cities, and it's something that the public hasn't really grasped in terms of its importance yet, but I think will increasingly as we continue to build along our coastlines around the world.